Welcome to Ginkgo Leaf Research. As always, let me start with the conclusion. I believe Bitcoin's total market value will eventually surpass gold's. Gold is worth about $30 trillion today. That is not the finish line for Bitcoin. It is only a milestone along the way. Next, I'll walk you through how I reached that conclusion. If you enjoy in-depth company and asset research, consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. All right, let's start with the nature of gold. To understand Bitcoin, we first need to understand why gold is valuable. Gold generates no profits, it pays no interest, and unlike real estate, it produces no rent. It certainly has uses in jewelry and industry, but those uses cannot explain a total value of around $30 trillion. There are metals rarer than gold, more useful in industry, and just as beautiful. Yet over thousands of years, gold has remained one of the most important stores of wealth across countries, cultures, and political systems. It became a form of wealth recognized across civilizations. The reason is simple. People often produce more than they consume right away. We do not use everything we earn the moment we earn it. We set some of what we earn aside for illness, unemployment, retirement, family responsibilities, and the freedom to make choices in the future. As long as the future remains uncertain, people will need a way to carry the value of today's labor and purchasing power into the future. Cash, bank deposits, government bonds, stocks, real estate, and gold all compete to preserve that purchasing power. Gold became the most successful non-sovereign store of value because it is durable, scarce, easy to recognize, difficult to produce in large quantities, and dependent on no government issuer. More importantly, people have kept choosing it for thousands of years. Gold's physical properties made it well-suited to storing value. Its long history turned that advantage into a global consensus. People hold gold not only because they value it, but because they expect people decades from now to recognize it, accept it, and exchange real goods and labor for it. Gold therefore proves three things. First, the absence of cash flow does not mean the absence of value. Cash flow is the source of value for a business, but it is not a requirement for every store of wealth. If an asset can reliably carry purchasing power into the future, people will be willing to hold it for a long time. Second, consensus does not make value imaginary. Money, property rights, companies, and laws all depend on collective recognition. The real question is not whether an asset relies on consensus, but whether that consensus can last. Third, shared recognition is a mode of its own. Gold is neither the most efficient payment tool nor the only scarce metal. But that kind of choice, reinforced over thousands of years, cannot be easily replicated by another metal. That is why gold's enormous market value has already proven one crucial point for Bitcoin. People are willing to place immense wealth in an asset that produces no cash flow, has no single issuer, and derives its value mainly from scarcity, a credible history, and shared recognition. Gold is not worth what it is today simply because it is a piece of metal. Likewise, Bitcoin will not become valuable simply because it is code. The real question is this: what does Bitcoin offer that gold does not? Second, let's look at Bitcoin's advantages over gold. Gold is excellent at carrying purchasing power across time, but it is still a physical object. Gold can preserve wealth for centuries, but it is difficult to move across borders or between financial systems. Bitcoin changes the way wealth can be carried. Bitcoin does not live inside a phone or computer. It exists as records on a ledger maintained by a global network. Whoever controls the private keys can move the corresponding Bitcoin. That makes Bitcoin easier to divide, verify, and move across borders. Whether you are transferring $100 worth or $100 million worth of Bitcoin, the same rules apply. You need no truck, no vault, and no armed convoy. Bitcoin's most important innovation is that it places final control of wealth directly in the hands of the individual. Control over real estate depends on government registries. Bank deposits depend on bank ledgers. Stocks depend on brokers and security systems. Gold depends on your ability to keep possession of the metal. Bitcoin held in self-custody depends on none of those institutions or registries. With self-custody, control rests with the person holding the keys. No bank needs to approve a transfer, and no institution can unilaterally change the balance. Gold can also be held directly, of course, but it has weight and volume. It must be stored, guarded, and moved. The more you own, the harder it is to hide, and the harder it is to take across a border. Bitcoin has none of those physical constraints. It needs no warehouse or transport, and you do not have to carry a physical object across the border. Gold is secure only as long as you can keep possession of the metal. Bitcoin is secure only as long as you keep control of the keys. In cross-border migration, regime change, or the aftermath of disaster, Bitcoin is generally easier to move and regain access to in a new environment than gold, provided the keys remain under your control. That control creates one of Bitcoin's most distinctive forms of value: the right to exit. When wars break out, regimes change, bank accounts are frozen, capital controls are imposed, or disasters strike, the first priorities are personal safety, food, water, cash, and a way out. Bitcoin cannot replace any of those things. It cannot solve an immediate survival problem. But once someone has escaped the danger, a new question arises. Can the wealth accumulated before the crisis be converted back into purchasing power in another place and under another system? Gold can serve that purpose. So can Bitcoin. The difference is that gold must be stored and transported, and the more of it you carry, the greater the risk. Bitcoin requires no physical shipment. If the keys remain under your control, you can regain access to that wealth somewhere else. Bitcoin does not need to replace gold in every situation. It only needs to become the safer and more convenient choice in enough important situations for more people to want to hold it. Gold carries wealth across time. Bitcoin can also carry it across borders and between financial systems, while allowing final control to remain with the individual. Bitcoin cannot replace everything people need in life, but this unique capability is enough to earn it a place in people's portfolios. Third, Bitcoin is carving out a new niche. These advantages explain why Bitcoin can compete with gold for store-of-value demand. But a more important question follows. Why could those advantages become more powerful over time? Because Bitcoin is filling a role that traditional assets have never fully served. Today, information, labor, and capital can move across borders, yet wealth is still tied to land, banks, legal systems, and politics. Real estate is tied to a particular country. Deposits sit on a particular bank's ledger. Stocks depend on a particular securities system. Fiat currency is part of the sovereign system itself. Even gold, for all its independence, is still constrained by physical form and geography. As civilization continues to develop, humanity will need a new form of wealth. One that, like gold, has no single issuer. One that, like digital information, can move globally. And one that can be controlled directly by the individual. Gold is relatively independent of institutions, but it is still bound to its physical form. Bank deposits are convenient, but they remain tied to governments and institutions. Before Bitcoin, no form of wealth combined all of these qualities. Bitcoin is the first to fill that gap. That is the niche Bitcoin is carving out: non-sovereign digital wealth that can cross national and political boundaries while remaining under direct individual control. It is wealth born from human free will in the digital world. No government ordered people to accept it, and no company can unilaterally dictate its rules. Strangers around the world voluntarily follow the same rules, preserve the same transaction history, and accept the same ledger as the record of who controls what. States and political systems can divide the world, but they cannot divide human free will forever. A species survives in nature not because it is best at everything, but because it is adapted to its environment. Bitcoin is not the fastest, cheapest, or easiest payment system to use. It gives up efficiency, convenience, and reversibility in exchange for stable rules, individual control, and resistance to shutdown by any single authority. No bank can simply reverse a Bitcoin transaction because no central institution has final authority. Protocol upgrades move slowly because no small group can easily rewrite the rules. Proof of work consumes energy because rewriting the ledger must come with a real-world cost. These apparent weaknesses are not accidents. They are the price Bitcoin pays for those capabilities. Every crisis is a real test of those capabilities. Bitcoin has lived through market crashes, exchange failures, government crackdowns, mining migrations, regulatory battles, and challenges from countless competing coins. Yet the network has never stopped running. Every time it survives another crisis, more people see what it can do and its credibility grows. For Bitcoin, time is not merely age. It is proof that the network has survived repeated attacks, doubt, and attempts to suppress it. A newcomer can copy the code. It can imitate the supply cap. It can improve the technology. But it cannot copy Bitcoin's record of surviving crises. And it cannot reproduce the global recognition, liquidity, infrastructure, and shared commitment that have already formed around Bitcoin. Bitcoin's code is open source. Its history is not. At the same time, traditional institutions are adapting to Bitcoin. Laws and regulations are clarifying its legal status. Regulated firms are offering custody services. Spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds have opened the door to traditional capital. Companies are holding it. Governments are studying it. And some are even holding it in reserve. The most important thing about these changes is not how much money flowed in on any given day. It is that Bitcoin has moved from an experiment outside the system to an asset that institutions, companies, and governments can formally hold. More countries are moving from resistance and caution to regulation, participation, and even competition. The reason is simple. A government can shut down domestic trading channels. It can restrict banks and mining operations. But it cannot order the entire world to abandon the same set of rules. If no single country can eliminate Bitcoin, then refusing to participate may simply allow others to capture the capital, technology, industrial opportunities, and potential reserve advantage. Greater recognition brings more holders and deeper liquidity. Deeper liquidity attracts larger pools of institutional capital. That, in turn, helps regulatory frameworks, custody services, and infrastructure mature. Success is not just the result of advantage. Success itself creates further advantages. A new competitor cannot replace Bitcoin simply by proving that its technology is better. It must persuade individuals, institutions, and governments around the world to abandon an asset they already know, trade, and hold, and transfer the same trust to something else. That is why Bitcoin is no longer just one option among many digital assets. For more and more people, it is the first asset that comes to mind when they think of non-sovereign digital wealth. Humanity continues to create new wealth every year. Some of that wealth is saved. In the past, most new savings flowed into real estate, stocks, bonds, bank deposits, and gold. Bitcoin is now among the assets people can choose to hold for the long term. It does not need to eliminate gold. It does not need to replace fiat currency. It only needs more individuals, families, companies, institutions, and governments to reach the same conclusion. A portion of wealth should be held in assets that are not issued by any government and do not depend on any single institution. Once holding Bitcoin moves from a minority experiment to a normal part of wealth allocation, Bitcoin will continue to capture a share of the new wealth humanity creates each year. Bitcoin has not yet reached a steady state. It is still evolving, and it is still competing for a share of global wealth. No one knows how many individuals, institutions, or governments will eventually allocate capital to it, or how large that share will become. That uncertainty is precisely why Bitcoin still has enormous room to grow. Once its role, status, and market share stabilize, it will be a more mature, less risky, and easier to value asset. But by then, most of its growth potential will already be priced in. That is one reason governments and institutions are willing to hold Bitcoin before the outcome is clear. They do not need to be certain that Bitcoin will succeed. They only need to acknowledge the possibility that Bitcoin may become an important global, non-sovereign store of value. And the cost of holding none may be greater than the cost of holding a small amount. Bitcoin's greatest growth opportunity therefore comes before its evolution is complete. By the time the market sees the outcome clearly, that opportunity will be gone. Of course, this conclusion rests on a clear condition. Bitcoin's scarcity rules, network security, and global recognition must all endure. As long as those core conditions remain intact, my conclusion will not change. Finally, $30 trillion is only a milestone. For that reason, any seemingly precise price target is an illusion. No one can know exactly how large a share of global wealth Bitcoin will eventually command. The best we can do is use gold as a simple benchmark for scale. My conclusion is clear. Bitcoin's total market value will eventually surpass gold's. At gold's current value of roughly $30 trillion, and with Bitcoin's final supply capped at 21 million coins, matching gold would imply a price of roughly $1,430,000 per Bitcoin. That number is not a price target, let alone the finish line. It simply shows the rough price level Bitcoin would reach if its total market value matched gold's today. Global wealth will not stand still. Humanity will continue creating more of it. And gold does not need to fall. As more individuals, institutions, and governments allocate a portion of new wealth to Bitcoin, it can keep gaining share in an expanding global pool of wealth and eventually cross that milestone. So my answer is clear. Bitcoin is still worth buying today, and it deserves a place in a long-term portfolio. $30 trillion is not the finish line for Bitcoin. It is only a milestone along the way.